We are once again talking about sugar, and we are focusing on the problems and the solutions for the sugar industry. Advocate Fay Mukaddam, the chairperson of the South African Sugar Association, joins us in studio. First of all, what has the impact of the sugar tax on sugary drinks been?
That's a big question, Susan, but such a critical one for our industry's, I think, existence and us going and building towards sustainability. First of all, sugar is largely introduced into drinks because of taste, that sweetness that we should all love. But also, just to remind everyone, or if they don't know, that sugar is also a carbohydrate. And carbohydrates are critical carbohydrates act as fuel for the body, and particularly the central nervous system. So sugar is really important and has been globally acknowledged and recognized as an anchor commodity, something that is important for all of us that we need to live with, and that because of the sugar cane being a wonder crop, there's a lot of other things that can happen or can be created and utilized out of the sugarcane stalk itself. The introduction of the sugar tax, known as the Health Promotion Levy, has been nothing short of absolutely damaging, destructive, and disastrous for our industry. As a result of that tax, downstream users like the beverage industry have had to reformulate what they put into their drinks to retain the cost effectiveness of the product for the consumer. And so in terms of that reformulation, it means that they use less sugar, which means the offtake has reduced. Once the offtake has reduced, then you see that adverse impact going upstream in terms of the producers. It's for the millers, the refiners, and the growers themselves. And so you're seeing significant job losses, you're seeing erosion of the industry itself, you're seeing a significant reduction in terms of GDP contribution. I mean, you're talking about 1.5 billion rand of reduction in terms of GDP contribution just because of the introduction of this levy. Now, of course, under phase one of the master plan, and I do have to acknowledge Ministers Patel and Adiza here, as well as Minister Godongwana, where there was a moratorium extended to the actual implementation of the sugar tax itself. Needless to say, though, whilst that has just paused everything, it's still standing there almost like a death knell that keeps clanging and that keeps us awake at night. So when you then have lower local offtake, what that means then is that we still produce in terms of what we produce. So our local market demand might then reduce, which means that we have more sugar available to export. But because of us exporting at a loss, that sugar then is exported at a loss, so you don't recover your costs of production. And that is the harsh reality, because of course the way that sugar is costed internationally is through a dollar-based reference price, which is why we definitely do as an industry need that strategic trade protection in terms of cheaper imports, etc. And also, like we saw with the phase one of the master plan, that there was a commitment not just to price restraint from our side, but also a commitment from the downstream users and the off-takers that they would buy proudly South African and buy local. So there's this tension in the system, and we have to get around the table sooner rather than later and talk about it, and talk about how we're going to resolve it in a manner that is actually mutually beneficial, where if we have to lose, we all have to lose a little bit together, not too much, and that we also are sure that we are going to retain jobs and we are not going to erode a significant industry, which is an anchor industry in these two economies of KwaZulu-Natal and Mpumalanga, and we are not going to give away our contributions or sacrifice our contributions to GDP.
But, okay, let's set the sugar tax aside for a second.
Sure.
Even without that, there's this global drive that consumers should consume less sugar. Has that had any impact on the sugar industry?
I think we must see it within the context of a kind of a health movement, right? and the fact that everybody is becoming a lot more aware globally around maybe making better choices in terms of consumption for a better quality of life, so that you will be healthy because we're all living longer. Okay? And that's fair, and I support that. What I don't support and I vehemently reject is that sugar is seen as the bad poster child and must be punished on somebody else's sacrificial altar, because if you don't eat sugar, suddenly you're going to be more healthy. That for me is nonsensical and very short-sighted. Going back to my earlier comment to you about how important sugar is in our diet, and of course it is one factor and one contributor, but to simply exclude sugar makes absolutely no sense. If you look at South Africa and how critical the sugar industry is to our economy and how pivotal it is in terms of our narrative of economic transformation as we're operating in navigating the new reality under our government of national unity, etc., then surely we need to have a far more serious conversation, as opposed to lobby groups just getting a lot of kind of media space because they are, journalists are having these sensationalist sound bites. Rather than that, let us get around a table, let us look at the NEDLAC report, which was commissioned in 2020 on the socio-economic impact of introducing a health promotion levy, the sugar tax, and let's go from there. We also need to realize, whilst we are globally intertwined from a sugar perspective, we cannot consider ourselves separate. We do not operate in a vacuum. But we need to also look at what is right for South Africa and what is right for us as being a critical, in terms of our critical and strategic positioning on the continent of Africa. And so for us, it's not about one or the other. It's not about you have to be healthy and exclude sugar. Certainly not. You have to include sugar and everything else. So I think that, again, when we look at it from a top-line perspective, that global demand might be decreasing for sugar, no, I actually don't believe that. I think what we need to do is, as an industry, which we're already doing, is looking at what local demand we have for sugar, and we retain that. Why? Because in order to retain that, we then have a positive impact on job creation, on economic transformation, etc. That we also need to then look at how we make our industry more competitive, more efficient. And we also need to look at, from that sugarcane stalk, beyond sugar, what are the other things that we can actually access and leverage from this wonder crop, like contributors to sustainable aviation fuel, to polylactic acid products, etc. And so I think that's the conversation we need to have, rather than just, throw sugar out. I think throwing sugar out will make life very sour indeed.
Let's have that conversation. Because I know that the sugar industry has been looking at alternative products to table sugar. What are the shining examples for alternatives?
Absolutely. And again, just to acknowledge the ministers and our previous ministers, and I'm going to hope that Ministers Tau and Ministers Tau and Steenhuisen actually also just continue the good work that was started. So what we were able to do under phase 1 of the master plan to support our reimagining the sugarcane industry is we were able to, together with the IDC, look at task teams that specifically drove investigation and research into other downstream diversification opportunities that are presented in terms of accessing the stalk, the sugarcane stalk in its entirety. So the two specifically are, like I've been saying, the one is sustainable aviation fuel, and the second one is looking at polylactic acid, ethylene, polyethylene products, etc. Those can be contributors to packaging. It's contributing also, if you look at this global move towards becoming more economically more environmentally friendly in our operations, environmentally aware, reducing our carbon footprints, etc. So when you look at potentially our industry being a greater contributor to an input which will then have an output of sustainable aviation fuel, which will contribute to reducing the carbon footprints of some of our airlines. That's a bit of a no-brainer. Of course, we're quite ready to go down that route. We now, hopefully with phase 2 of the master plan, we can move towards feasibility studies, and that'll be fantastic. But what we also need is an enabling policy, legislative and regulatory framework, which we don't have at the moment. But I do think that the opportunities are endless. We also need to be mindful of the fact that everybody bastardizes sugar, and as I said, punishes sugar. But sugar cane as this amazing crop, and looking at diversification, already sugar is not the only product that we get from the sugarcane stalk. You're looking at ingredients and contributing products to the pharmaceutical industry, to other beyond sugar. I mean, one of our milling companies is also a refiner. They have this amazing product of ginger and syrup, all those toppings for our ice creams. It's sweetness, but there's also, like I say, pharmaceutical contributors. There's potentially to the aviation industry. There's potentially to packaging, etc. So I think we need to anchor the conversation about our reimagining the sugarcane industry correctly, so that it actually can be seen as one of the pillars that drives our national economic transformation discussion and debate, rather than being seen as an industry that needs to be punished because of the way some very loud and ill-informed people are actually connecting the dots poorly, in my opinion.
If I understand the master plan correctly, if SASA and your various associates, if you cannot find an alternative product or products that's viable, then you need to help the growers diversify into other sectors. Is that correct?
Yes and no. I think it is correct in that diversification is a key output to our reimagining our sugarcane industry strategy. Okay? Through that, we fully intend to transform, innovate, disrupt, and create a sustainable industry. So I think diversification is there. The industry has been driving that already. We know we should, because we are not tone deaf. We live in a very complex, ever-changing world. Our landscape itself is very dynamic. And so we do have our finger on the pulse. Yes, in that, what we need to do as part of this next phase is we need to then look at what would be the feasible alternative options, the diversification opportunities for our industry to pursue. And that's where we are at the moment. We've completed the initial research investigation studies. We now need to potentially look at pilot projects where we look at whether or not there is feasibility. But feasibility isn't just commercially driven. Obviously, it needs to be commercially sound, looking at these alternative diversified products and these projects. It needs to be commercially sound, but it also needs to take into account where the industry, our two provinces of KwaZulu-Natal and Mpumalanga are, as well as where we are as a nation in terms of South Africa Incorporated and our organizational development, if you will. And for us right now, any kind of transformative intervention or initiative needs to consider leveraging diversification downstream opportunities in a way that it will also answer some of the national imperatives, such as employment opportunities, taking care of our youth and making sure that we grow our own. We incubate, which we do already. We grow our own talent, and we look at then reallocating them into different parts of our industry. and looking at whether we can extract the most value from that sugarcane stalk so that we increase the area under cane. We make sure that our black small-scale growers are no longer on a subsistence level, but they're actually growing. We look at also supporting through transformation initiatives, black hauliers, for example, black groupings of hauliers, looking at infrastructure enhancement and rehabilitation. And through those kinds of conversations, increasing the area under cane, then all of a sudden you start seeing our industry different. I've become a bit exhausted, I suppose, Suzanne, of the narrative that positions our industry as always having our hand out and needing help. We need support, but we are driving the change that our industry needs. We definitely need government support, and we would welcome our stakeholder support because we do not live on an island. So in terms of the value chain, the downstream value chain stakeholders, looking at all the other stakeholders, even the stakeholders in terms of your sugar tax, the people who are loud and proud for kind of misinformed reasons. But let's all get around the table, because this industry is one that it is in all our best interests to actually not just retain, but sustain and create some magic together. As I said, together, life is definitely sweeter.
Now, one of the areas where every agricultural sector definitely needs support is when it comes to infrastructure and logistics. And what is the situation for the sugarcane industry in that regard?
Dire. It is dire. Something, after I was appointed as the chairperson, something that was hitherto unknown to me, but became glaringly obvious, is how, as an industry, we are inextricably intertwined with other industries, and we are impacted by other ministries as well. So when you look at transport, you look at infrastructure like road infrastructure. After, for example, the floods that we saw in KZN, the unrest that we saw in both KZN and in Mpumalanga, we were unable to support some of our growers, our farmers, in getting the cane within the 48-hour window period to the closest mill quickly. Why? Because road infrastructure was washed away or non-existent. Because of unrest, maybe roads were blocked. The transport costs, simply because of the increase in fuel costs, has been mind-blowing and has had a disastrous impact as well. So for our small-scale growers, particularly our black small-scale growers, the impact has been so significant because all of a sudden you're looking at producing a crop which might not necessarily be viable in terms of the return, because the costs of production, and I include our millers here, the cost of production are not necessarily recovered in terms of once we produce, refine, and actually sell our product. And that is why we're not just bemoaning our fate, but we're actually looking at how we can work together. And, I'd appeal to all the powers that be, even if it means for our sector specifically, and looking at the different ministries that are involved, maybe sector-specific desks, and having an intra-ministerial task team to look at how we can get things sorted on an urgent basis. This is no longer about introducing initiatives, but actually introducing interventions at a system level, at an infrastructure level, so that we can actually move to be a sustainable and transformed industry.
Any final thoughts that you would like to share with viewers?
I think, Susan, if I haven't already made it clear, that as a country and as a continent, and I suppose even the world, that now more than ever, after what we've all experienced in the last few years, I sense that there is rather almost a depressed psyche. And just from a national level, you look at this depressed national psyche. And I think we now need more than ever to work together to co-create solutions that will actually, in some shape or form, contribute to achieving our mutual objectives. that we know that we might have to, through negotiation, give certain things up. But we are no longer in a space where we can have lines that are drawn in cement. We can have non-negotiables. We have to walk into these rooms. We have to walk in with open minds, with open hearts, and we have to say, how can we be better together? Because if we don't heed the call, which is now at a catastrophic level within our industry, then you are going to see such a significant implosion that it isn't just going to be an industry that's affected. You're looking at about 1 million households being affected. You're looking at 2 provincial economies being adversely affected. You're looking at literally within a short space of time, a complete extraction of a significant contribution to our national GDP. And from there, if you're looking at the dominoes that will fall, when people are not given an opportunity to be productive members of the economy, there is then social ills, there is then unrest, there's deep unhappiness. And yet, we are so well positioned with this industry, looking at this crop, to actually use this industry, looking at our downstream diversification opportunities, to create a blueprint for how South Africa can move into reducing our carbon footprint and actually becoming more green and environmentally friendly in the future. So obviously my mind boggles when I don't see everybody wanting to hold hands together and, as I say, make life sweeter for us all.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us in studio. That was Advocate Fay Mukaddam, and she's the chairperson of SASA.